Hey there, I'm Clifford Bates, and welcome once again to Reading Aristotle's Politics. Today, we're continuing Book 7 of the Politics on the Best Regime, looking at Chapter 7, which deals with the political multitude. Uh, so let's go start looking at Chapter 7, okay, right there. Concerning the political multitude, we spoke earlier of what its defining principle ought to be. Let us speak now what quality of persons they should be in their nature. So again, the principle, the defining principle is going to be virtue, right? This idea of this best regime in the regime that we're doing, that is the one we should pray for. Their character should be virtue, okay? They should have the character. They should be free people, and they should be the principle that should be defining it is kind of preeminence of virtue, okay, right? And therefore, we should be looking at their quality. In other words, let us speak now the quality of the person that should be. Now, one may ascertain this by looking both at those cities among the Greeks that are held in repute and at the entire inhabited world as divided among the nations, genos, the nation. Now, 31, let's look at note 31. Uh, again, this is book one, right? We looked at the question of book one, particularly note 31 of book one. So we can go here. Let's do this. Let's go all the way to note one, book one, and 31. Notorious defense of natural slavery, right? This is the whole defense about natural slavery. In other words, he says this is the whole question of natural slavery, and that there are certain people who are enslaved by nature. Now, so, okay, the nations, okay? In other words, we're going to be looking at the people, people that inhabits the political polis, the political community, are going to be composed of people. The people of the genos, the race, or the ethnoi. The word is ethnoi. Nations ethnoi. Ethnoi means like ethnic tribes, ethnic people, populations, the nations. The Greek, the genos is the race, right? The genos is the race. The nations and the race be divided because of regions and cultures and aspects that create ethnoi. Okay, and the polis are the various people who form the polis. Who form again. This is the strip of koinonia. The koinonia at the extreme aspect is the of the most intense, but small number. It's the male-female partnership, right? This is that, or the friendship band, or the band, right? And then the next level is the household. Then what? The polis, which is, and the polis is said to be this peak in that sense, the peak in the that it's allows for self sufficiency. That the koinonia is self sufficient. It has the other pairs is too few. Here just right, and then everything above it, things like the ethnoi and the genos are still forms of koinonia. There's something in common that holds them together, but they're too large, they're too big. So the polis is that complete koinonia in that sense, right? Now, but he's going to look at this. We're going to look at the difference based upon the inhabited world as divided by the nations. Therefore, and look at the cities that held repute. That is the famous discussion back in book two of the cities of Sparta, Crete, and Carthage, right? But then Carthage is not a Greek city, right? So therefore, when we repute and the different nothing, the nations, and now it gets so weird and interesting. The nation in code locations, particularly in Europe, are filled with spiritedness. Thumos, this is idea thumos, right? Thumos, but generally lacking in thought and art. Hence, they remain freer, but they lack political governance and are incapable of ruling their neighbors. In other words, this is interesting. Now, here is the word is apolituta. In other words, something is missing politically. Something here missing. Absence of, right? That's 33. Now, their spirit thumos plays a major role in the psychology of public, but not otherwise prominent Aristotle's writing now. Lord's article talks about this a little bit. But again, let's go look here what he's doing here, right? Uh, so therefore, they lack a lack of a plutula, I mean, governing, right? They have a lack of this ability to govern, right? They are incapable of ruling their neighbors. In other words, they don't have a kind of political spirit in that sense. They lack political governance, and, and therefore they remain freer. Right? Again, this is kind of like the German myth of Tacitus, right? This is very much what Tacitus in his Germanica says about the Germanic tribes, right? The spiritedness, but they're freer, but they lack this thought and thing of culture, right? Now, those in Asia, on the other hand, have souls endowed with thought and art, but a lack in spiritedness. Hence, they remain ruled. They remain ruled and slavish. Okay, so therefore, yeah, again, and this is something that we will, if we turn to modern thinking, the closest modern thinker who deals with this, the role of culture and environment on the character of the peoples, of the different nations, of peoples, is Montesquieu. And Montesquieu and his Spirit of the Laws, right? The idea of climate and things like this will shape different peoples, and their character will be shaped by their environment to do different ways, right? Here is another case that Aristotle seems to suggest that Europe versus Asia. Asia is the warm climates of Asia. There is a lack of there's a lack of spiritedness. Thumos is lacking, but hence they're but at the same time they have some culture. They have this idea of art and thought, right? Art, techne, and thought. So therefore, they're endowed with thought and art, but are lacking spiritedness. Hence, they remain both rulers. But the stocks of the Greek shares in both. In other words, just as it holds the middle in terms of location. So the Mediterranean world is a middle. It's warm, but it's not too warm. Asia is, for some reason, the climate is harder. The argument goes, even though it's geographically, they might be in terms of where the latitude and longitude is, but for different reasons, the climates differ. The climate's something more here, maybe than just mere climate. Um, Now he says, for it is both spirited and endowed with thought, and hence both remains free and governs itself in the best manner, and at the same time is capable of ruling all, should it obtain a single regime. So in other words, there's something with the Greeks, and this is actually points also to maybe Alexander, right? Alexander, who is attempted trying to do this, right, to govern all things. This is a clear reference here to what Alexander will attempt to do, will do, attempt to unify the known world under his rule, right, to rule all human beings in a masterly fashion. In that sense, this is not a political rule, but a regime by Alexander. Um, uh, the problem here he's saying is that the Greeks are a little bit of both, right? They're in the middle position. They have both art and thought, but they also have the spiritedness. The Northern Europeans have spiritedness but lack art and thought, right? Likewise, now Aristotle doesn't say what happens when cultures cross contaminate, right? They cross contaminate and they move things. Maybe Greek thought goes to Greek and Roman thought goes north, and they imitate it. They build something out of it, right? So so that in other words, the Greeks are able to have this aspect of ruling over others. The Germans are not. The Asians are just used to being ruled like masters. They're what he says, that they remain ruled and enslaved. In other words, they have this. You have despotic rule. That's the nature of mastery. Mastery is their form of politics, or that defines their political systems in that sense. The nations of the Greek also display the same difference in relation to one another. Okay, right? The different nations of the Greeks. And there's not one Greek. There's many Greek. There's the Lasmodones, the Ionians, right? The Macedonians, and the different, and these are then divided into the notions of the ethnoi, the different ethnoi forms, the Helleni, right? Some have a nature that is one-sided, while others are well balanced in relation to both of these capacities, right? So even among the Greeks, there's going to be some who are more inclined to thumos, and then others more inclined to thought and art, right? So even though they mix both, but some are going to be more like this, right? Um, while others are well blended in relation to both these capacities. It is evident, therefore, that those who are to be readily guided by the virtue of the legislator should be both endowed with thought and spirit in their nature. So therefore we should look at this, and we're gonna be using this. Who are gonna do this? What kind of people we would want in this sense, right? It is evident, therefore, those who are readily guided by virtue, guided by the legislature, right? The legislature is going to guide them towards virtue, should be both endowed with thought and spiritedness, right? In their nature. Um, for as to what some assert should be present in the guardians, right? Now, this is, again, I think this is a reference to Plato. Right? This is a kind of point reference, right? To be affectionate towards familiar persons, but savage towards those who are unknown. It is spiritedness that creates affectionateness. For this is the capacity of soul that which we feel affection. Now, this is interesting. Stumos. Stumos is the agents of affection. That seems to be, in other words, we should be. It's not. They should be. They should be affectionate towards. Again, this is the reference to puppies, right? Dogs. The spirit. Plato in his Republic points that the whole point of the guardians are like to be puppies and dogs, who are they're affectionate towards friends and aggressive towards enemies, right? But he points to spiritedness is the aspect of affection. Something about spiritedness and affection. But let's think about that for a second. Is that true? Is it thumos that leads to affection? Or is it something else? Is thumos really truly the thing that leads to affection? Aristotle suggests that affection comes from philia, love, not thumos, spirit. Love, not philia, come one of the forms of love. Philia is the thing that creates and affection is kind of a love. Is thumos kind of an engender of love? That's something to think about in that sense. This forces us to kind of look at the question of the soul, which is not really addressed in the politics. It's more addressed in the Dionoma, right? Aristotle's famous Dionoma, where he talks about the soul, right? So we are left with a question here. That he makes an assertion here that okay, the guardians. Now this is a direct reference to the Platonic reference, right? The guardians. This is that we're going to why the citizens are going to be the guardians. Again, this is going to suggest that the city that Aristotle is creating here may look like Plato's either the Republic or the Laws, but then we should we should remember the criticisms that Aristotle had of Plato's Laws and the Republic back in Book 2. An indication of this is that spiritedness is more aroused against intimates and friends than against unknown persons when it's considered slighted. So therefore, this is interesting. He says is that because of betrayal? In other words, anger against betrayal forces more people who are intimate with us when they betray us, right? This is betrayal emerges. So, so is Dumos stronger in other words, it is it because of betrayal, and therefore Thumos is connected to. Okay, he makes an assertion here, but this assertion we should think about. Okay, is it really simply true? Maybe it isn't true. Okay? Hence, Archelaus, when complaining of his friends, apparently addressed his spiritedness. Yes, it is among friends you are choked with rage. Right. This is a 35. This is one of the fragments about talking about Achilles, talking about his anger about uh, you know what's going on here. Both the elements of ruling and elements of freedom stem from this capacity for everyone. In other words, ruling and freedom comes kind of this aspect of spirit. Spiritedness is a thing expert at ruling and indomitable. So something about thumos is this. What spiritedness is tied to ruling, he says. Now that's interesting. Wouldn't ruling be also be tied more to thinking? Remember, we talked about all the way back in book one about book one, chapter two, about the two forces by which we have kind of this, bond, right? The first is the parent-child, right? That the parent rules the child, right? This is about arche, ruling, right? And the second one is the one who has foresight over those who lack foresight, right? That is kind of the two principles. One is that there is this fact that they're the parent, there's parental authority, that the parent produces the child is reproductive, and then the creator, and then the created, the one who's born, and then the other one is the one who knows versus the one who lacks knowledge, right? Thumos is not there. He doesn't talk thumos. I mean, in the discussion of book one, chapter two, about where does rule emerge out of, the two possibilities of a rule that emerges at chapter two, the beginning thing, spiritedness is not mentioned. So why is it asserted here that spiritedness does this thing? It's something about rule. Now it's maybe tied to freedom, right? This is the idea that there is a jealousy, that the spirited are the more jealous about their freedom, right? So let's think about that for a second. Spirit, in other words, is capacity for everyone. That thumos is a capacity that everyone can share, right? And that a spirit is a thing expert at ruling, he says, and that. But it is not right to say that they are harsh towards those who are but it is not right to say they are harsh towards those who are unknown. So he's clarifying that this is the Platonic position. So it's criticizing the Platonic position of prudence, of thumos, sorry, not prudence, thumos. That it is not right to say that they are harsh to unknown, right? They're friendly to that, and one ought not to be this sort towards anyone, nor are magnanimous persons savage in their nature. Now, magnanimous persons is 36. This is interesting. This seems to allude to a discussion of magnanimity, megalopsychia in book 4 of the Ethics, chapter 3, book 4 of the Ethics, the megalopsychia, right? The magnanimous person. This is interesting that the savage in their nature, except toward those behaving unjustly. So you shouldn't be, and you shouldn't have what he says here, right? This thing here, one ought, this idea that we should be hostile to the stranger. No, we should only be hostile to the unjust. The stranger we should not, because why? We should not be toward everyone. We should not have this hostility towards everyone who's not just the unknown. We don't know them. Do they deserve to be hostile towards? You should only be hostile towards the unjust. And the magnanimous, right, are not savages in nature. The idea, those who are noble, and this idea of this great soul, the magnanimous person, the megalosokia, and the ethics, this whole account in the ethics of this great person. He's not a monster. He's not going to be savage. He is cultivated, so he's not going to treat you treat strangers justly. Do they merit? Do they if you come in this idea that the stranger, you welcome the stranger in Greek culture, that you don't necessarily attack the stranger. So in other words, and further, if they feel rather, in other words, they will feel this rather towards their intimates, as was said earlier, if they consider themselves treated unjustly. In other words, again, but remember, it's the question of being treated unjustly. In other words, it's not that it's intimate or strange is the issue, but rather whether you've been treated justly or unjustly. That seems to be the underlying, the real lesson here. Not. In other words, it's hostility is tied to being people who've been treated unjust. It's not being friend. In fact, the difference is you, because the more intimate you are, the more trust you have, right? The more trust, and there's a feeling of betrayal attached to that. A stranger you don't have much trust towards, and you don't necessarily feel betrayed by a stranger, right? So therefore, the intensity of the anger will differentiate because of knowledge of them, and how much trust that you've had and you feel betrayed by, right? So that's that aspect of it. But the question here is, why should you feel angry? It's because an injustice happened, some harm has happened. They've harmed you, right? So the anger is tied to being harmed, being unjust. Moreover, it is reasonable that this should happen, he says, right? But the question of that we should not feel we should not feel hostility towards the stranger. We should not feel aggression to the stranger, but rather to those who are more likely anger at those who betrayed us, right? Treat us unjustly. For when it is among those who they suppose should be under obligation to return benefaction, in addition to injury, they consider themselves deprived of this as well, right? Thus, it has been said, harsh are the wars of brothers, and those who have loved extravagantly will hate extravagantly too. This is 37. This is that line. The quotations of tragedy Oedipus, um, is from a quotation from tragedy Oedipus. This is a fragment of Euripides, and the second one is an unknown author, right? So, so therefore, this is a problem here. In other words, that it's that those who we have had, people who we've benefited and we think benefits should come back from us, that they have instead start to harm us. This is something that which causes greatest things, and hence this is why the harsh are the wars of brothers, right? The brother, this is why people who are brothers, they're going to be angry when they feel they've been betrayed by brothers. This is going to be like, and those who have loved extravagantly will hate extravagantly. This is explains that. Now, concerning those engaged in politics, then how many there should be. Now he returns back. Now this has been a long digression about thumos, right? The question of thumos, and the question of how much thumos there is, and the role of thumos, and um, and the question of spiritedness and of the people and the kinds of people, right? And the idea of the median people versus those who have lots of thumos but aren't political, but lack art and thought, and those who have lack in thought but lack thumos. And the Greek is being moderate, right? And the idea of the connection of thumos tying to um, uh, 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 tying to the question of rule, right? And also tying to the connection of how they respond to rule, the question of anger, being, whom are they aggressive towards? And the answer here is that it's more complicated. That one is, as I suggested, there is a connection between the idea of resentment because I've trusted you, I benefited you, and therefore benefit should be returned. We know each other, we share things, and therefore mutuality, kindred spirit. And now you've betrayed me. How you betrayed you? Harm has been done, right? Harm and unjustness, something that not. In other words, instead of doing benefaction in return, harm has been done, and therefore there's an injustice here. The argument is, and responding to the injustice of the thing. And the danger of here is that there's greater hatred because of the intensity. It's not only that the harm was done and you resent that, but now you feel betrayed, and that you. In other words, this is why the brothers harsh are the brothers of wars of brothers, right? And he says those who've loved will hate, because they're feeling a betrayal. Now let's continue the last paragraph of that section 9, which is the last paragraph of book 7. Concerning those engaged in politics, then, how many there should be and what quality in their nature, and further with respect to the territory, how much and what quality it should be, there had been enough discussion. So therefore, he says we've discussed a lot. We've talked about what kind of how much territory, right? The number of their number, right? This has been the question of the quality of the people, And we should be looking at a political people who are balanced. In other words, we should have one that is balanced between thumos and they should have thumos, but they also have art thought, right? They should be guided by thought, a balance between thought and thumos, like the Greek against the Greeks. Again, the idea of the Greeks are this middle point, and that they need to be tied to this. They should be magnanimous, people that has a nature that is towards virtue in that sense. Then what? Concerning those who engage in politics, then what? The citizens who are going to be the political citizens, these are what? They should have that nature, right? Their nature, the territory, what kind of territory they should have. We did the previous chapter, right? How much of it and the quality of it, that's been addressed earlier also. These have been enough for discussion. The same precision should not be sought through through arguments as though what depends on perception. In other words, very interesting. The same precision should not be sought through arguments as though what depends on perception. In other words, again, the problem here is that perception, mathematical conceptions, precision and art. This is a very ending. This is the question of how much precision we should have in these things. In other words, our perception of things. Our perceptions can be false and not necessarily correct. We can be misled. So we need to be careful here. This is a warning about being too precise and too careful. That you should not, you're not going to have precision in this. Again, this goes back all the way to his discussion of precision and ethics, and the ethics about why the political science is not going to have the precision of logic or episteme or other things, even though he's trying to create a science, an episteme for political things. But he is saying that this is kind of the science, or the kind of science that's engaged here is not as precise as those in the logical sciences or the natural sciences, right? It should not be sought through arguments as through what depends on perception. Okay, so therefore we're doing an argument here. This is an argument that things that is logic. There's logics in the argument. The perception of perceiving of things may have may not be as clear and may not be as straightforward. So therefore, this is how he ends chapter 7. Well, I think we should stop here. There it is. If you've liked what you've liked, you have any comments or questions or issues that you want to ask me about this, please put it in the things. And when I see it, I will respond to it. If you have, if you liked it, like it. If you haven't subscribed, subscribe. If you know someone, encourage another to subscribe. Another thing you can do is, well, okay, there's another thing you can do. If you didn't like it, you can say that. Explain why you didn't like it, what I did wrong, or something I didn't cover, or something you would like to have had me covered, or just didn't like it because of my tone or my voice or whatever. Again, maybe I can learn something. If you want to follow me on social, those of you who like me and like this, you can follow me on social media. My links are below. If you want to help contribute to this, me doing these things and being able to do these things continually, okay, I understand. Subscribe star on Patreon, you can be a member. Of course, I don't have a lot of people there, and it's like, oh God, I did this too late, and I'm not Mr. Popularity, and I'm not doing something sexy. So I hope you guys will like it, but in that this. Another way you can help me is go buy my book, A Notebook on Aristotle's Politics. This is a study guide. It is a Cliff's Notes on the politics. It has basically a guide to help you read the politics for students and students or people studying the politics. It is a book by book, chapter by chapter. We have summaries, some kind of thematic questions that emerge from the text, thought questions, outlines of the various sections, and highlighting the points of what's that are being addressed, with maybe graphs and charts to kind of get a better handle of any portion of the text, to understand it a little better, and also some tools. So therefore, you can get it. You can get it. It's available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and all the main books distributors. If you buy it through, but if you buy it through Lulu, the publisher itself, yes, you have to pay shipping, but I get the public no the profit that the money the bookstores make. I will make that. They'll pass it on to me. So therefore, it's better to buy it from Lulu. I hope more people will. We must have no students who are studying the politics. The politics is studied every school like this. So therefore, this is a very useful guide. Okay, well that's that. On that, wish you guys a good day, and I will see you again tomorrow when we look at chapter 8. Okay, take care and have a good day. Bye bye.